is probably the year where I've sort of failed the most, which sounds weird, but that also then means I learned the most. So as Eve mentioned, I'm Gordon. I'm going to be talking to you guys about fail fast, ship faster, sort of moving from writing code to orchestrating the development of code. This is loosely what the agenda is today. In some ways, it's sort of a personal journey from mostly this year, but also a lot of activities before this year of how AI felt a bit meh, and everyone else was super hyped with it. And then to now how it's moved where I'm sort of have multiple things open at the same time and all of them are doing things and you sort of every 3 seconds saying, oh, here's this new thing. For the talk itself, I had to like cut it off at some point because as I was busy prepping stuff, I'm like, oh, I'm going to add this and I'm going to add this and it just grew and grew and grew. So I hope you guys are willing to wait a long time tonight. That's a little bit about me, where all my socials are, and let's dive in. So, as the title says, I'm a little bit of an efficiency nerd, and basically what that means is that if I see something that feels like it could be better, I'll do that even if it doesn't make the most sense all the time. And what that's basically led to happening is that with AI and the huge sort of context switch that it used to be, so you go off to this website, do some stuff, come back to your IDE, do a little bit more stuff. Like that was just too much for me. So I watched some of the other guys do stuff, and sort of at some points it made sense for me. But this year is probably the year where I've sort of failed the most, which sounds weird, but that also then means I learned the most. And a sort of metric that I have for that is if you look at the amount of blog posts that I've done. So forever ago, 2014, had a lot of energy, was a lot younger, lots of blog posts. And then it sort of dwindled and went down and went up. And then this year, suddenly there's just so much to write about. I remember the one day I was chatting to Dan at the back there, and I was like, I spent so much energy doing this thing, like I just don't have the energy to write about it. And then I walked to the train station, and then I wrote about it on the train on the way home, and then published it when I got home. Because like the stuff is just so exciting that I just want to sort of share it with everyone. So this brings me to the first thing that I want to show you guys. So forever ago, so my wife's a professional pastry chef, and people that are creative like that need a portfolio. I said to her, I'll build it for her. I was still building it for her. And all the time she's asking, when's it going to happen? And I was like, yeah, I'm going to get to it. And as I said, yeah. ChatGPT, everyone is using it. Everyone was building custom GPTs. People are building amazing stuff with it. I just felt too much. Tried a lot of tools. Jack over there showed us Bolt. Other people were showing us V0. Just didn't work for me. Again, it's just the context switching. It was just way more than what the value that I felt I got out of it was. So the workflow just wasn't there. And yeah, like I said, V0 looked promising. Or it looked very good when other guys used it. Jack used Bolt. It worked well in a demo. I went home and it didn't work so well for me. So a little bit of sort of what that timeline looked like. Early this year is when I started using Gemini quite a lot, more for conversations. So Eve mentioned in the tech news where GPT feels more friendly. I think 5.1 is a bit of a step back for the usefulness of it, but that's a different conversation. Gemini is very friendly to talk with. It feels like you're talking to a colleague, and the way it structures its sentences just feels very natural and easy to sort of brainstorm with. Around the middle of the year, we got 2.5, and then coding tasks felt a lot easier. And some of the reason for that is you could just chuck a bunch of context into it and it just remembered all that context. Then around August, started having a lot more MCPs integrated, like into VS Code, into PR processes with the sort of the config on Enterprise GitHub. And things just felt like you could do a lot more, put the right guardrails around things, and it just felt better to use. And then September, GitHub released Spark. Spark's amazing because I'm a back-end dev, and yeah, it's amazing. And then in October, we got the Copilot CLI, and this is probably the most exciting tool for me. I don't have enough time to show you all the cool workflows that we have, but I will show you some of them that we use daily at the moment. So let's look at documentation. So normally when you do something, you would say you're talking with a mate, you're whiteboarding a bunch of stuff, and you're like, okay, this is a solution, it's a great solution. After that, someone else says, hey, you need to go document that. Like, yeah, I'll get there. Sort of doesn't happen, or you get a thing with like very low details in it, and it's really hard for anyone who wasn't part of that conversation to sort of take on that documentation and understand what you meant. So the overall document sort of tax there is very high, right? So as I said, you'd go and solve problems for a long time, sometimes hours, sometimes days. Great victory, document. That becomes a chore. Sometimes you do something like this. Yeah, document the thing. Devs feel great when they're like, hey, that idea, it's on the backlog. We'll never forget about that thing now. And it just goes there to die, really. But yeah. So I started using Gemini for planning. So I'd put an idea in there, see what ideas it had. Something felt different when I started doing that, though, because as I mentioned earlier, it's like the conversational aspect of it. It's like I was just talking to a mate, except it replied straight away and didn't leave me on red for a long period of time while they're doing real work. And it wasn't just answering questions, right? It wasn't just like, hey, how do I do this thing? And it's like, yeah, it is. Lots of times it will reply back saying like, hey, but have you thought about this other thing? Or tell me a little bit more about your scenario, because you might have not have thought about everything. And when you start seeing those kinds of responses, it makes you think differently about how you have those conversations with Gemini. So you start asking it questions differently so that you can try and get more out of that experience. And as I said earlier, it starts to sort of challenging your thinking. So it won't just, well, most of the time, it won't just be like, yeah, sure, here's the thing. It will try and dig in a little bit deeper. So here's an example. I think lots of the time, especially as a senior dev, the sort of hole that you can fall into is you know how to do some stuff, and you're like, yeah, we're just going to do it that way. I've done it this way for the last 10 years, we're going to do it that way. The benefit of Gemini is you can say, hey, I've got this problem. Tell me ways that we can do it. So that's what I did. I had a workflow that in our APIs, and I needed to sort of change some of how that brain do the thing. So I think it was how the locking worked around that. So it came back and said, cool, these are sort of your options. There's a couple more underneath that, but it's sort of like, here's the pros, here's the cons of the different things. Some of that you know, some of that you don't know. Often you'll be like, oh, I didn't think of that, right? And then normally at that point, once you've made the decision, you're like, yep, this is the way to go. As I said, hey, there's a backlog item to go do the thing, document it. But now you do something like this, where I said, thanks, this is great. Here's our ADR template. Can you help me write that? And then that gives you a starting point that you can then go and massage and have a rich ADR. If you had spent, say, I think in this case, I'd spent like 45 minutes to an hour going in circles trying to get like a right solution, like all that context would normally just be lost. And now all that rich context goes straight into the docs.
What's an ADR?
A architecture decision record. Yeah. I shouldn't do the abbreviation on the first one. Yeah, put it on the backlog. I'll just remember that for next time. Shove it right down the bottom there. Yeah, and yes, seconds later, you have something like this, where it's got like, here's all that context. This is the options we looked at. This was the pros and cons of those different options. Ultimately, this is what we chose, and this is what it means for the product. And then there's probably lots of people thinking like, yeah, but I mean, you get those guys be like, hey, here's the doc, ship it. But AI doesn't write perfect stuff unless you're using Gemini, of course, because, Gemini's better. And as of this morning, it got way better. But yeah, it's not perfect. So you need to, when you get that output, you need to spend a bit of time sort of massaging it and getting it how you want. So you review it and you say, change this thing. Now, sort of two flavors of that. One is you get that output, you go work on it yourself. The other way is saying like, oh, I didn't like this. So you maybe quote that piece and say, can you change this? And the benefit for me when you do that is that you say, can you change this thing? And there's this other piece somewhere else that you missed, and it will fix that piece of context as well for you. And that's sort of a much quicker workflow than, again, if you had to just start from scratch, or if you had to get that initial dump and then sort of work it from there. And in the end, you have much better quality documentation, and it's easier to keep it updated. And then, yeah, the AI captures all that context, so it's just easy for you. So the old way, again, the context switching to AI is just painful. The new way, having that conversation is part of the work, right? You're putting all this rich context in there. Something that we do sometimes as well is you just sit there and you put your PC on dictation. You sit there looking at the roof and you're just saying words. The words don't all have to make sense because the AI fixes that part. You just basically brain dump what's in your head into the text box, hit enter. And as long as you've got enough instructions there to sort of guide it, it gives you a great result. And yeah, so the documentation of this is then obviously, like I said, the byproduct. You almost just get it for free. And so with this, I mean, there's still some workflow tax, right? But the going to, say, Gemini and doing that conversation is a lot sort of cheaper than even if you had to directly have that long conversation with a colleague, especially just from straight billable hours. Not saying that you shouldn't do that part, because that's also valuable. But I think you do that once you have an outline, even if it's the starting outline, right? Before you massage your documentation, you say, hey, this is what I've got, let's talk about it. And maybe the two of you or the three of you change that up a bit more. So that's documentation. Let's take a look at coding things. Lots of people probably care. Maybe you'll start caring more now about documentation, but probably care a lot more about coding. So December 31st, and I hope December has 31 days, because otherwise this is awkward. December 31st. I normally don't have big plans, right? I just stay at home, just chill, life's easy. Sometimes I go to sleep early. It's funny, my wife and I used to do this thing where parents came over and someone has to entertain them till midnight. So we'd flip a coin to see who gets to take the kids to bed and the other one has to stay up until midnight. And then, yeah, the kids got older and they wanted to stay up to midnight, and the plan still stopped working for us. But last year, I decided to do something different. There's all this hype and the tools just got better, and every time I said, Jack, the things just don't work, it's like, no, try it now, it's much better. It wasn't much better. So I was like, well, got a couple of hours, because we were going to stay up to midnight anyway. Yeah, it didn't work out for me. I ended up having about 12 hours in the various tools. V0, I hit my credit cap, so I bought a month subscription. Got it, like, this is perfect. I try to use it. I can't get it out of the tool. Like, do the export thing, just doesn't work. Apparently you need to know a little bit about React if you want to use the things. The guy who's very good at React didn't mention that part. He just worked with it like it was second nature. So I switched to Bolt because he showed me this cool example where you can export Bolt directly to GitHub. It exported to GitHub. I couldn't run it locally because, I don't know, there's some magic inner dependencies. And so I was like, okay, I'll do some updates, and that's supposed to sync, and then that didn't work. And so I had a version on Bolt that was different from the version on GitHub, which was different from the version locally. And it was just painful. So I had nothing to show. And as a bonus, I lost my whole relaxing New Year's Eve. So that wasn't a great experience, right? The promise was you just vibe code it. You see all these videos and guys like, I just single prompted it. It's amazing. Look at it. Wow. Yeah, that didn't work for me. Not then, at least.
Were you feeling special?
Felt so special. Yeah. Not in a nice way either.
Singled out
Yeah.
the universe.
Yeah. I'm supposed to be good at this stuff, right? It's like, if I can't do it, how do I expect like someone else like, oh no, just use the tools, it's easy. It's like, no, not quite, unless you're that guy. It's just easy for him. So it wasn't really there, right? Like, it just felt like a big waste of time. I have ironically tried a little bit recently again, because you always have to loop back and see if things got better. And it has got better, but GitHub Spark's just way better. So it is what it is. So where we at this point, right? We know at that moment in time, well, a little bit after that moment in time, Gemini is good for conversations. But the code generation part was a bit bad from that V0 experience, right? And then, like I said, Gemini 2.5 arrived, and that just made things feel better. It wasn't just like, hey, write me this little function that does something. It was like, yes, some service, write me, I don't know, a lot of classes. The big problem that had is it says, hey, here's a big file. And you're like, well, it's easier to put in the AR. So you're like, guys, I think we need to change the way we store stuff. We need this massive file that's just got everything in it. And it was just optimized for storing it with AR. It's not that great, but I mean, I guess in some ways you can try and validate it. So I think because of the ease of doing that, it led to some interesting practices in dev teams. But it could hold all that context, which was great. So now you weren't just writing code like from scratch in it. You could do sort of whole implementations. You could talk about that idea, again, that you go and document. And directly after that, you can say, hey, now can you help me write that code? And it all just works. So it generates full features for you, and it understands all the context. So obviously makes it reduce all that friction, and life's amazing. But if you do big refactors, it's pasting code from everywhere. So then you get these little snippets where you're like, hey, this directory with this filter, can you go grab all those files and copy the contents into my clipboard so I can go and paste it into the LLM? And that it was just painful for those bigger things. So anything cross-file change, it was just hard. And again, back to the balance of the workflow versus the value. For those bigger things, it just felt really hard. But there were some places that it was really good. And this is probably the only value V0 probably given me. Is I took my blog. So I had a blog, which I'll show you a picture of that, what it used to look like soon. I gave Gemini those 5 images at the top. So one was, this is sort of the design that I want. The other 4 were, this is sort of what my blog looks like at the moment. I gave it a bit of a prompt, and you can see the text there sort of goes down more. So I spent some time typing all the things out that I wanted for my blog. Because by this time I'd learned, okay, well, you need to just give it a lot more context, and then things generally work out better for you. From there, so I sort of tweaked how I wanted those requirements to look. I said, hey, can you turn that all into like actual requirements for me? And it did. So it went and wrote this giant requirement. I put that giant requirement directly into GitHub, and then I just assigned it to Copilot. A little while later, I had a very big PR. And the PR just had like, here's all the information, like all the different things that had changed. So again, with this, the Copilot agent will finish some work. You review that work. You say, hey, can you do these extra changes? it goes ahead and does those extra changes. And at this point, that agent was very good at putting pictures. It doesn't do that as much anymore. But you would have seen in that list, it sort of said, hey, this is what it used to look like. This is what it now looks like. So inside that sort of process is using Playwright to run your actual project. It's taking screenshots of the actual running project, and it's using those screenshots to determine, like, is things actually working the way you would expect it to work. So I basically went from that screenshot on the left, which V0 did generate for me, and then I was like, oh, this looks great, capture it. And my blog looking like the right-hand side looks, to it looking the way it looks now, where it's a little bit more how I like my stuff. And all the changes I make on my blog at the moment is all just one of the various agents, like, hey, can you do some work for me? So this was a big refactor, right? And obviously Copilot agent worked great for that, because with the various different files that needed to change, Gemini just wouldn't have cut it. So Gemini is great at writing services. VS Code, the Copilot agent in there, is great for doing sort of smaller refactors. And at this point, you start gaining a lot of confidence, maybe too much confidence. And you're like, I'll try something bigger. I did effectively a rename. I changed, the devs had decided that an entity was called a customer. The client thought that they were more clients than customers. And the one day we were like, modular monolith, let's just go rename that everywhere. So the module gets renamed, the properties get renamed, every reference everywhere on the screen, everything else gets renamed. It sounded simple. I did that refactor myself manually afterwards because I lost a lot of time from it. But again, that, like, you do those big refactors, you're like, okay, that's where the boundary is, right? I shouldn't go past that boundary just yet. So that then basically cemented that, well, when you want to do deterministic things, use deterministic tools. So you use your IDE. If you go there and say, rename this property, it does that everywhere. And it most of the time works well. When you want to do stuff that's a little bit more, hey, I sort of want to add this feature, I don't really know 100% how it needs to be, or I do know 100%, but I don't know the code, use AI for that, and it works perfectly fine. So yeah, the right tool for the job. IDE, structured changes, renames, refactors. Gemini Pro, writing a new service, hey, give me that code. VS Code, go do some small refactors. And then the Copilot agents in the cloud does slightly bigger refactors, right? And I say sort of each tool doing what they deterministically are good at. So if you get enough experience with it, like often I chat to people and they say, yeah, they tried Copilot, it just doesn't work. And you sort of have to get that muscle memory of using it and knowing where its boundaries are and how you work with it to know, okay, I can use it for this, but I can't use it for this other thing. And sometimes you just go back to the thing that didn't work and you're like, oh, the tool's got better, I can use that for that now, right? Or you can just use Copilot CLI, but we'll get to that later, because that, like I said, that just changed everything, and how pretty much most of the tooling that I use these days goes. But you're still learning, right? Well, I'm still learning, and sort of on purpose. So one of the things that I did was I asked ChatGPT to write a bunch, like, I can't remember what the project was. I said, like, hey, create me a bunch of issues, create all those issues in GitHub. I said to the Copilot, like, go do all the issues. And all I did was review what it put in the PR comments. I didn't look at any of the code. If it put a screenshot there, I'd be like, oh, that doesn't look great. If it put no screenshot, YOLO, merge. Next issue, let's go. That turned out terrible. I highly do not recommend doing that. It was fun, but not productive at all. But on a similar workflow, if you do put like a little bit of effort in, you can do the same thing. So I asked ChatGPT, because even though my preferred LLM is Gemini, I every now and again try and use what's on the other side of the river because maybe it gets better. You can see 5.1 at the top there. Did some terrible things with images when I used it. It's good for some stuff. And again, you have to use it to know what those good things are, right? So also to generate some PBRs for a URL shortener. Made a whole bunch of those. Very good PBRs. I put all of those into GitHub and then assigned it to Copilot. And then Copilot gave me PRs. I gave it feedback. We iterated on each of those. And in the end, it gave me a decently functional demo app. The app itself was written in Rust with I think I ended up using a React front end. It was functional to a point, but something that you learn out of an experience like this is that the agents will normally do just the layers that feel most convincing, and then they bury a whole bunch of stuff underneath there. You're like, hey, here's this vague task. And it's like, look, I did this vague task for you. And then you click the button and everything blows up. You're like, what happened? It's like, oh, you didn't ask me to do that. And sometimes it'll write docs for you. And then it's got a piece at the bottom. It's like, for future work. And it's like, but how did, you just decided yourself that that's going to be future work. I'm like, can you go do that? It does one of the items of the 4. Like, can you go do the other ones? And then, yeah, sometimes it just doesn't want to do it. And you sort of have to live with that sometimes. So, yeah. Yeah. Exactly. So,
Start yelling at it?
I have this other blog post that didn't make it in here, which is the mental day of the agent. And the idea is there's sort of like at the end of your workday, it's hard to do complex tasks. So you just do /clear, wipe its memory. You're like, let's go again. It's perfect after that. It's even better. You don't have to get angry. You're just like, forget that. Just try it again. It's amazing. So yeah, both of those cases, the one where sort of it failed extremely hard, and the one where it gave me something that felt usable. For me, those are both success, right? You're understanding the boundaries more, and then when you need to use that on sort of proper projects, you understand those boundaries and you don't waste money. So then we had the AI explosion. Agents explosion. It's like AI, but different, but the same. So it feels like we use a tools for a while, and then someone brings something cool. You're like, oh, that's nice. And then while you're looking there, 13 companies just hit you with new tools, and then you just don't know where those came from, right? With the rates of the tools coming out, at the moment, you sort of have to decide which ones you're going to just play a little bit with and which you're going to play a lot with. And then when something feels convincing that you can use it, then you dive into that sort of a lot more, right? So the other day, Dan says to me, so Dan's at the back there if anyone's wondering, says to me, hey, do you see Cursor 2 came out? I was like, yeah. It's like, have you used it? I'm like, no. It's like, are you going to use it? It's like, I don't know. I was like, okay, maybe you can use it. You can let me know what it's like. Because it's an investment to go and pick the thing up, understand it a bit more. But sort of what our team does is we share that information quite a lot with each other. And that way one guy can go learn some mistakes, share it, the other guy learns something else, and you just keep that sort of learning circle going. So at this point, again, Gemini 2.5, great at coding. But the implementation, it was sort of, I was doing that myself, right? Copying that code out, going to the IDE, getting it all to work. And then we got all of the things. And it's hard sometimes to, you sort of skip some stuff. So we did something cool with prompts in VS Code. And then as soon as we did that, we're like, oh, but there's these chat modes thing. And then so the hey guys, this is awesome lasted for probably a day, maybe 2 days. And then we switched over to a new thing just because I guess we found that a bit too late. So with the sort of Copilot agents, those started off very simple. Hey, here's an issue, go do some work. Then they made it a lot more interactive. So you could start saying, hey, go fix this piece. At one point, it ignored the @Copilot, and anyone commented anything. It's like, oh yeah, that works for me. And it just went and did it. So you could be like, @teammate, is this really a thing? And then Copilot will like, yeah, I'll fix that. And it's just like, no, stop. You're like wasting our build minutes here. But yeah, the agent sort of got so much more powerful. There's lots more ways you can interact with it. So here's an issue that on a tool that I have called Copilot this issue basically says, hey, this doesn't work for me on my, I think he has an M1 Mac. Like, okay, the warning that he has there, I see that warning also on my Mac. It just works, so I just ignored it because, hey, it's not broke. Just bury it. If you just change the warning levels and you don't show the warnings, there's nothing's broken. And that's what I was doing. And then he's like, oh, this is broken. So at this point, it's like, well, I'll just assign this to Copilot, right? But then also this button is scattered everywhere, so I could just assign it to Copilot there. And in the end, what I end up doing is sort of using the other tool for it. But you can drop into those conversations. So, I mean, you saw just on that one page, GitHub has 2 different ways that you can interact with that agent, right? So you can also, like, from anywhere now. So before it wasn't like this, but say I have my own pull request, and then you have Copilot reviewing that pull request, and you're like, hey, this is good. You're like, hey, can you go do it? And but like it gave the feedback, and often like it'll write the code, and it's like, this is a terrible way of doing this. Like, you wrote the code, and then you're like, can you go fix the code? And so it's this awkward this thing where you find yourself saying like, it's just, yeah, I don't know. Life's getting strange, man. As the tech news showed, things are just getting weird in Hogwarts. So you don't need an issue anymore, right? Before, when I was creating all those issues in with Gemini and ChatGPT, I'd mostly put those into GitHub issues because I needed the work to get done by a cool agent. When I do it locally, it just didn't feel like it was running as well. And now it just needs context. And you can just, and the sort of delegation is then immediate. It's like anywhere where you are, you're probably either knowing it or not knowing it, probably like about 5 keystrokes away from handing work off to a Copilot agent. So in this case, there's some feedback on a PR, and there's that button that just says, hey, do this implementation for me, or at Copilot, here's maybe some more context, go do the work for me, and it'll do that work. That feedback happened to be, as I said earlier, like given by Copilot. So if you haven't already, on your GitHub repos, make sure these settings are enabled if your org policies allow it. The important one here is reviewing on new pushes as well. So often you'd push some code up, teammates give some feedback on it, and you push some more code up, and before, Copilot wouldn't give you feedback on that. With that checked, it annoyingly gives you feedback on every single push that you send. Lots of the times it's good feedback, but you're like, you could have seen this last time and you chose not to, like, what's going on? But that sort of helps, basically adds some extra capacity to your team because it's doing great reviews first. So it'll do a first round review. The devs will normally look at that, see what's valid, what's not valid. Once they've actioned any feedback, then they say, hey, teammates, can you take a look because I think it's ready. Then anywhere in GitHub, you can click this little button at the top and you can just say, hey, do some work. You can choose which repo it is. So you don't have to be directly on the repo you want. You can paste in a link to a pipeline. I often use this one for, hey, the build's broken. Like, here's the link. Fix the build, please. And it does that really good. But if you're on Mac and you use Raycast, you can also create a task directly from here. This one is like maybe a 6 out of 10 because I don't always notice that repository link, and I thought I was making changes to my blog and I accidentally pushed some work into a project that the work shouldn't have been in. So pay attention to what's in the drop list if you are going to do sort of either of these methods. But the point is, like, you can just be anywhere, right? I don't have to go fire up GitHub, navigate to the place I want, create an issue. Like, it's just a couple clicks away, and now work's been done for me. And the thing that holds sort of all these agents together, or the secret sauce, is that Copilot instructions. So in those instructions, you sort of define what your project conventions are. So you might say, this is a modular monolith. Our backend looks like this. We use this for cross-module communication. Our front end looks like this. This is the different patterns that we have for the architecture. And all that information gets stuffed in there. And then part of what we normally have in our instructions is like, hey, when I give you feedback, re-add that to the thing. So if there's something that you hadn't thought of before, so maybe it does some work and you're like, no, we normally do it this way. Well, then it will go and update that instructions and say, well, actually for this specific thing, we should handle it this way. And so the next task that it just does it that way, which is really good. And yeah, so from that sort of self-improving process, each project's agents just get smarter, smarter, and smarter. So this is sort of what that instructions file looks like. So it sits in the .github folder, copilot-instructions.md. So yeah, if your project has one of those, maybe go see if it's stale. Lots of people don't update that. Yeah, keep it up to date and your agents will generally work a lot better for you. And then I've got a couple of rules, SSW rules, which I've created with different sort of levels of usefulness. This one I find very useful. So when you're doing stuff mostly with Copilot CLI, but also when the hosted agent does work for you, you might find it will drop out markdown files, and it normally just shouts in the markdown.md. Those are task summaries of the work that it's done. And so what I found quite useful is you tell it, hey, store those like in the docs folder, maybe in a CLI/tasks or something, right? And that way, if you are doing a lot of work with agents and someone says, why does this look like this? That's more information that you can be like, oh, this is what the agent did. And that's normally where you also find at the bottom, here's the next steps. And you'll be like, oh, this doesn't work this way. And you go there and it's like, oh, Copilot said I should probably do this next. And I've wasted a good couple of hours not reading that part of the do next. And then I was like, yeah, I should probably do this. And then when it shows you the diff, it's like, yeah, I just ticked off that thing that we said should be next steps. This one, some projects I use it, some projects I don't. Sometimes it's annoying. So if the project is you're basically just using agents on the project. Normally that'll be like personal projects. You just get it, like it will normally try and just commit stuff for you. The problem with that is it says Copilot made this change. And you're like, no, I made that change. And if you're working in a team, it gets awkward. So that side project, the Copilot that I was mentioning, I got about 63 commits into that project. And then I'm trying to make a manual change myself. And then I realized my Git config wasn't set up because I have my like specific signing keys. And it's like, no, it's not set up. I'm like, oh, who's been committing then? It's like, no, Copilot. It's just like the whole list. Copilot did all these changes. So this is basically just a snippet that says, hey, when you do a commit, go look at the config and add that person as a co-author. And then the last one is just, if you are working in a sort of a containerized environment or just normally on your machine, keep all the sort of temp files in the project folder. So often it wants to throw stuff out into the temp directory. And most of the time you can go look at that. But it's good to sort of keep that in the project scope so you can see what it's doing. And with all of this, and I've sort of alluded to a couple times, like the quality of that request matters, right? So if I just say, hey, go add some social images, it's probably not going to do a great job. Like, what does that even mean if you had to just go and figure that out, right? Whereas if I say something a little bit more detailed like this, where I specifically say I want OG images that are that dimension. I want to like sort of auto generate that metadata every time there's a build. I'm giving it a lot of context that guides it towards what I actually want. instead of having it work for half an hour and you're like, that's not what I wanted, and then you sort of tweak that, and that extends that period of time to try and get good information from it. So the other way that you can sort of speed things up for yourself is by having a specialized team. So with that Copilot instructions that I mentioned earlier, you might be tempted to sort of chuck way too much in there, but that all becomes sort of huge context for your agent, right? So if you end up saying, hey, this is how tests work, you need to do this part of the UI this way, like there's just so much information there, and then the agent gets a little bit confused. You have to think of it as like, if this is a junior dev, first day on the job, and you're like, there's our Confluence repo that's got 15 years of history. Can you know it and then tomorrow do stuff off that? That's effectively what having that huge Copilot instructions file looks like. So one of the ways you can fix this is by using chat modes. So each chat mode has a bit of a prompt that sort of specializes what it does. So you can say, your job is writing PBRs, or your job is writing unit tests, or your job is helping me sort of plan PBRs more in depth. It then doesn't get confused with all that extra context, because if I'm asking my agent that does my product backlog items to do work, it only does that. It doesn't care that this is how you write tests, and so it can do a better job from that. So some examples of agents that we have is an issue scribe. So write me the PBR. For that one, we give it a lot of information about the project, because obviously it needs to understand that quite a lot. And we ask it to sort of self-ask us questions so that we know that it knows the context, and then it can make great PBRs for us. Otherwise, it just does weird stuff. I can't remember some of the examples, but there's some classic ones that it used to just add. It's like, should follow this architecture. And it's like, well, yes, the whole project does that. And since we started using these, the things we've needed to change, like in the PBRs that get generated, or in the tests that get generated, is a lot less, because these are a lot more focused. Again, we've got a SSW rule that gives you some of what the structure of these look like. So it's a starting point that you can use to make your own. Yeah.
Are we at a stage where your different chat bots can talk to each other? So if a back-end change needs some context about a front-end change, can those two specialized have a conversation with each other to get that domain knowledge?
I've heard that exists. I haven't used it. Yeah. So I normally I really just throw Copilot CLI at everything. It's like it's the multi-tool. It just works, man.
Yeah, it's chaining agents. So
yeah.
Yeah,
There's a lot of stuff that I've seen where they like have the agent. I think that's what you're saying, where you have an agent that's just orchestrating the other agents, so the information feeds back and then it flows it down into other agents. But I haven't played much with that. So I mentioned sort of the feedback loops with those chat modes. Dan's got an awesome blog. So normally what I used to do is say, ask me questions at the end, and it would ask me questions, but it would give me like this giant paragraph of yes stuff, and now I have to try and figure out what's questions, what's not questions. So with the prompt that he's got, it effectively says, well, here's the first question, and it gives you specific options. And obviously you can say, actually, I have this different option, but generally those options make sense. And then once you answer that, it'll go look up some stuff and see how that maybe impacts the next questions, and then it'll ask you the next question. And it'll keep asking you question by question until it has enough context, and then it will execute that task. Cool, so that is agent-y things. And this is how I became a UI dev, sort of ish, maybe. So, as it's probably quite clear, I'm a back-end dev. I don't try to be a UI dev. I actively run away from UI stuff as much as I can. I have great UI guys on my team, and that way I don't have to do things. I reckon that's, if anyone did Windows Forms dev, like before everyone just did web, that's sort of where my peak of UI magic was, dragging those controls around that gunmetal gray screen. Like, that was it for me. So performant, so amazing. And then, yeah, web. Every time I had to do UI stuff, then this is normally where Sam's the culprit, right? So I go and do some stuff and it's amazing. He's like, you're using this wrong. When you make the screen this awkward angle that no one's got the phone for, that thing pops out. Thankfully though, because Sam's a good person, he makes PRs and he fixes my blog, so that's amazing. So I'm getting small tweaks. But yeah, you are. It's just, you have, some people have it, like the networking gene. Some people have the networking gene and they're great at knowing all the things about networks. I don't have that gene and I don't have the UI gene. Like I got unlucky, I think. Like those just aren't there for me. So if we go back to that portfolio that I mentioned, that I made of my wife's, as I said, I tried V0, tried Bolt before. They weren't great. All the expectations were there and it just didn't work. And then GitHub Spark came along. I noticed that it generates a lot of React code. It also said that it can push this into a Git repo. And I thought, well, if you put one and one together, right, like GitHub, and then they make GitHub, surely that integration works. And it did. So that was amazing. And when it pushed it to GitHub, I could actually use that code, which was really cool because, again, that had never happened before. So if I take you through the journey of making that portfolio for my wife, right? Again, it starts with getting those requirements. So I said to Gemini, this is sort of what I'm looking for. It gave me a whole bunch of stuff of what that could look like. I iterated through that plan with Gemini, figuring out what the structure is going to look like, what the different areas are going to look like. Once I sort of felt happy with that, I said, can you generate me a spec? And so it goes away now because obviously it's that we've done the FOSS loops and it says, here's all the things you need to know about this project that you want to build. Now at this point, I could take that, give it to a dev that knows some UI, maybe they get started for me. Or alternatively, I can go to GitHub Spark. So I loaded up GitHub Spark, said to it, hey, I want to build this thing for my wife. And then I go back to Gemini and I copied all that context in. So it's given me this rich requirements doc. Instead of me dropping this into GitHub like I used to before, just put it all in there. And this process, I must admit, does take a little while, but they give you these cool little floating lights and then you feel like a cat with a laser. So you just sit there and like, wow. And then they got cool little words that pop on the screen and it's awesome. But eventually it generates something, right? And now you can play around with that. And then on the bottom left there, you can go and give it more feedback. So in this case, they have some suggestions. One of those suggestions was, hey, can you make those cupcakes be real images? So I just used that suggestion because that sounded great for me. Again, it goes away a bit, make some more changes. And then I have some real images. So browse around the code, do a little bit of a split screen. You're like, yeah, this looks pretty decent now, right? You can go play around with the theme, although I mostly normally don't use the theme. Yeah, I export it and then I get the other agents to do it. You can click the publish, and this puts it at a live site. At that point, it's live only for your user, and you can invite other people if you want them to see it. And then the magic part is exporting that to GitHub. And from this point, you can now work with it. Now, something that GitHub Spark does support is keeping that sort of live connection. So if I did want more UI changes, I could go back to it and say, hey, can you make these changes for me? I don't do that because every request in Spark, at least how it used to be, uses 4 premium requests. And when I do every request to all the other agents, they only use 1. So I'm a bit of a cheapskate, and I get like the cheap labor to just do all the work for me, and it works amazing. Like, I mean, we all do it. But it's worked out so well so far. So I start off with a great base with Spark that really understands those UI frameworks, and then I move it out to something that's a little bit more manageable for me. And now I have this dilemma, right? I'm a backend dev. I know C#. Blazor's very friendly to work with because I just use all my... I mean, it's not great to work with, but I mean, it's approachable is what I mean, you know? It's terrible to work with. But as a C# dev reading it, I can understand the words that's there, and 5 is equal to 5. JavaScript 5 might be equal to 5. Like, it depends on the day and how many equals you add in there. Like, you need like 10 of them. Like, no, it's really, really equals. But yes, like, if I have the agents doing stuff for me, it doesn't really matter. The agents and Sam. They can just help me out a bit. So yeah, GitHub Spark is creating great UIs for me, and I use this as sort of a blueprint. One of the experiments we did, because we're working with the Blazor project, is we generated some cool stuff in Spark, shoved it across to GitHub, and then said, hey, to the GitHub agent, can you just rewrite all of that in Blazor? Like, okay. Took like, I think 42 minutes, and it had the first draft, and it left out some features. So we're like, hey, you missed the stuff. I was like, oh, my bad. And then we went and added some more stuff. And they were like, oh, for our project, we use this very specific control library. It's like, okay, and refactored into that control library. And that code in the end, it ended up being like very close to just usable for, hey, like copy and paste into your proper project, right? So even if you don't have a React app, you can use that as a starting point. And then the LLM's just like, hey, different language for it. It just does magic, man. Makes those texts into other texts that compile differently. So yeah, you can iterate, as I said, you iterate that with PR. So the question you might be asking, or maybe you're not asking because you're really good at it, is how do you get really efficient using AI? And to that I say it's just mentoring. So something that, and again, I was chatting to Dan around this. As you might know, Dan and I chat quite a lot. Something that dawned on me the one day is that when I feel that I'm doing good stuff with AI, I'm doing the same things that I would consider good mentoring skills, right? So you're patient with it. You don't just be like, this was terrible. I'm just going to do it myself. You have to be patient. You need to give it clear instructions. You can't say, hey, just go do the thing. It's going to do the thing, and your version of the thing is very different to the version of the thing that it wants to do. And you have to give it good feedback. And that's sort of those couple of things will help it be sort of much better. And then probably most crucially is you have to trust that the process is going to work out. Through experience, you'll know when you're hitting your head against the wall. Like sometimes you'll try, and you do the clear. Okay, let's go again. Now you're a fresh dev, and I'll just ask you to do new work. But generally speaking, you have to, once you spend enough time with those tools, and you can know where to use it, where not to use it, you'll have a good sort of sense of how things are going to work, and it makes it easier to trust that process. And now, probably to my favorite section. Feels like I've been speaking for hours. So I did warn you guys beforehand, it's going to be long. Okay, so the CLI integration. This part's equally exciting, equally scary for me. So with all the stuff I was saying already, like with VS Code, all the different agents, like we have all the building blocks to just be like very efficient with doing sort of any task, right? We've got the different chat modes. They can write tests, they can do plans, they can do sort of anything. We got the agents, the hosted agents, they can just churn through a lot of work. Different teammates, I think one of the guys working on Aspire was saying, like they'll assign an issue to it, and then everyone from the team is sort of saying, hey, change this, and you've sort of got this community of people driving that outcome, instead of it sort of being like one person just working on it. So we've got all these tools, and they all work amazingly, right? But something, I mean, when you stand there, you're like, this possibly can't get any better, and then it possibly gets a lot better. So the Copilot CLI comes out, and I used Warp. I think I'd used Gemini. I used a couple of them, and they were okay. They did some stuff great. It executed stuff straight from the terminal, which feels weird at first. But you get used to it, and then it starts feeling really awesome. Now you're having these natural conversations sort of with your terminal, right? You're right there doing stuff. It's not running on an agent somewhere in the cloud. We have to pull that code down and then run it. It does some stuff. You see, oh, it's doing something weird. You stop it, like you interrupt it. You give it more feedback. And that loop just is really quick. It's not, like I said, I mean, with the agents, it's, hey, stop the thing. Okay, wait for it to stop. Here's some feedback. And it just, that loop feels, as great as it is, it just feels too much. So there's no more copying commands around. These days, because my Git knowledge is falling back slowly, because I just say, hey, can you go and do this thing, like change this thing in Git for me? And it just does it. Like I don't have to remember, hey, I wanted to do this command or this specific command. And Brooke was learning all the specific commands. I'm like, hey, Copilot. The guys get pretty annoyed with me because like, how do you do this thing? Like, just ask Copilot. Like, no, how do you do it? I was like, ask Copilot. You just do the thing. You can ask it afterwards how it did the thing. Or it writes a comprehensive doc for you telling you how it did the thing, which is also equally as great. And the workflow for this just feels amazing, right? Because you're getting fast feedback. Things are just happening fast. Everything's awesome. And then you remember it's got terminal access. And that's scary. It's also got file system access. And that's also scary. And at this point, you just feel like crying, right? Because you're like, I really want to use the thing, but I can see the big sign that says, unsafe, don't use the thing, there is fire. And you're like, well, if I just walk a little bit closer to the fire, like maybe it won't burn that much. So the question then you would ask is sort of, how do you use that safely? And that's where I sort of found myself probably 2 months ago. So if we remember the lessons we learned earlier, right? Deterministic tools, like your IDE, great at doing refactors. Those more creative things, hand that off to an agent. With Copilot CLI, sort of just forget all those things. Giant refactors, hey, do the thing. I've got this big blog post to write, hey, do the thing. It just handles it, right? There's all these other supporting things, like your Copilot instructions. Often I would use the chat modes. So I'd say, hey, there's this chat mode that's got context. Use that to do this job. And then I find myself not going into VS Code anymore to do it as much. So the thing I made was a secure, portable Copilot CLI environment. So it's a sandbox environment. It's Dockerized. And it just mounts just the directory that you're trying to work with into the container. It also does some validation for the token. So with your GitHub, with the GitHub CLI, so if you're using that locally and you do like GH auth and go do some authorization, that might have some extra tokens on there that you might not know that you have. And then Copilot CLI gets access to that as well. So the common thing here is someone's got billing access as an administrator across multiple organizations. They use the CLI to do some of those administrative tasks. Wow, that was a mouthful. And now the CLI has that same access. So someone has a dodgy bit of prompt in there. It reads that dodgy bit of prompt, and suddenly you've booted all the users out of your organization because it's got access to the token and it can do that work. So when you fire this thing up, it says, hey, you've got these scopes. Are you sure you actually want to use this? Because this could be dodgy for you, where the normal one doesn't do that. And then probably one of the other sort of cool things here is that there's no pollution, right? Because that's running in an environment, it can go and do whatever it wants. write files wherever it wants, and when it dies, all that information sort of goes with it, obviously besides your project files. And then you've got that process isolation. Again, it can do whatever it wants in that space, and it doesn't matter. So then, yeah, what happens if it does try and just nuke everything on your machine? Your host doesn't care about it. Your other projects don't care about it. Annoyingly, the actual project you're working on does care about it, but there's a way to solve that as well. None of your SSH keys get changed. All your stuff's probably in Git already, right? So some other cool features that this tool that I made has: mounts, which sounds not that cool when I put it on as a piece of text on the screen, right? This is the woo! This is amazing. That's what I was expecting. No, okay. Jeez, wow, tough crowd. Yeah. So the reason I say mounts is cool is that you can specifically say, well, these paths, I want to mount them in as read-only rather. So where everything is normally writable, you say, hey, the Git folder, make that read-only. And you know the agent cannot touch any of that. One of the things that we're considering doing is saying all of our domain projects, make those read-only. We found that the agents work really well when they have like a rich domain to work around. And so our devs generally write that rich domain, they write the tests around that, and then we let the agents use that rich domain. So if you make that read-only, there's no chance of those things sort of accidentally getting changed, right? And then there's a couple of sort of base images. So if you're doing stuff with .NET, there's an image that's got that in. If you want something with Playwright, there's Playwright. One of the guys is looking at adding a C-based image to do some cool C stuff. And then ironically, the best feature is YOLO mode, which feels weird because we're just saying security, right? But there's some method in the madness. So what YOLO mode does is it says, so Copilot has these two cool arguments that you can pass in. One says allow all tools, and the other says allow all directories. And if you're in a sandbox, should be okay, mostly. So when you do YOLO mode, it avoids the most annoying thing about normal Copilot. So normal Copilot will look at sort of every command that wants to get run and says, this looks dodgy. Are you sure you want to do it? You're like, yeah. It's like, oh, this also looks dodgy. Are you sure you want to do it? And most of the time, it's parsing it weirdly. With YOLO mode, it just does the work. I sit there. It's like someone says, oh, can I call you? And like, just give me 5 minutes. Write up this big prompt and go. Have the call, get off the call 25 minutes later. Oh, look, it's just finished doing that dev. So while I'm having a conversation with someone else, it's just writing all this code. Doesn't need to ask, I mean, sometimes it needs to ask me for stuff. Normally you handle that up front. And once it gets started, it sort of just goes and does all that for you. So some of the ways that I'm using this tool. So the obvious one is write some code for me. But I found some, in my opinion, more interesting ways to use it than actually just writing code. So we had a bug, I don't know, a little while back where we had templates that now were working fine. Any new templates created in the system work perfectly fine. We had some very old ones that we just couldn't archive. For some reason, they're just broken. And this is one of those, it's working now, just ignore it kind of a things, right? But with the Copilot agents, you can just go and do that work. So normally, if you were to try and, like in this case, we had 300 commits. And normally, if you had to go and debug, like figure that out yourself, you're looking at like most of a day to try and like root cause what that issue is, right? And lots of the times you're doing that with a teammate so that you've got two pairs of eyes on that, and it's just you don't miss stuff. Now, I use, well, in this case, I use a small prompt similar to this. I said, hey, we've got this issue. We've got this thing that's broken in June. It's now very long after that, or the other way around. Can you go and investigate that for me? And there's a lot of text here, but basically what it's saying is, it gave me a very long document. So it took like 25 minutes. It went through those 300 different commits, and it said, these are the specific commits that had changes for that. And it explained that we had a new feature, so it looks at the issues that's in our GitHub. So we had a new feature that changed how functionality worked. And basically the root cause was that when that new feature was put in, no one wrote a data migration to move the old data over to the new way of working. And that was very quick. Again, for this one, jump on a call with someone else. This just works away in the background, right? So there's sort of three main ways that I see of using it. One is this way, where you, hey, go do this stuff. Look at the Git history. Tell me what's changed. For the tool itself, I actually use this to write the blog post. So I go and say, hey, look at everything that's changed in October and give me all the points for a blog post of what's actually changed. And so it looks at the code, it brings out, these are the new features. These are the features that we've changed. This is stuff that's breaking. And it just does an awesome job at that. The next thing, which this is great for, is analyzing sort of the current state of a project. So for that, you might say, this was the original prompt. Sorry, it's getting hot in here. The aircon on still. Phew. Anyway, this is the prompt. Sorry guys, it's just my relationship with gravity and this stage is just, it's just warm, man. So this is the prompt that I had previously, right? And I spent a bit of time trying to figure out what a better prompt would be. And all these words don't matter as much because you can go to my blog to get it. But the important bits in there is I tell the agent where I want reports to be written. And that's one of the paths that I mount into every session so that it's consistent. I tell it how I want to name files. So use a specific date format, the specific directory, so it's easy for me to find stuff. And then I tell it this is how I want to structure those reports when you give it to me, so that each time I look at it, it's familiar for me for how that works. And then again, I ask it to ask questions, right? And so I have in my clipboard history that bit of text that I said earlier. I paste that into the prompt. I then say the bit that's specific to this. So in this case, I said, I'm interested in a zero integration. Basically, I want to know what is all the configuration, what's all the integration points that we have with it. If you have any SQL scripts that can help me find that configuration, that'll be great too. And then I got this document that's 31 pages long. So I get a markdown file, and then in VS Code, I just convert it to a PDF just because it feels easier to read. But you can see it's got an exec summary for me. The end, it's got a cool conclusion, and scattered throughout, it's got lots of useful information like links to different libraries and everything else that the project uses. So then the other sort of one of the three things is for future changes. I want to make this change to the framework. What does that look like? So with .NET 10 coming out recently, I was looking at this when we had the RCs. I said, hey, here's this project. Is it worth upgrading to .NET 10? Like normally when you do that, you'll just try it and be like, it doesn't work. There's this dependency. In this case, I just said, hey, can you go check it out for me? And again, with a little bit of iteration, because you're like, hey, you missed this thing. And then it'll write a script and it'll go do that work for you. But then it gets every single dependency, sees if there's compatibility for that dependency. It gives you, in this case, a 16-page doc that's helpful for knowing if it feels like it'll be worth spending that time. And as I said with the previous one, but didn't show, it gives you a bunch of references. So in this project, you use these things. So you might want to go read up a bit more of this if you are going to do this work. And then, right at the end, giving you some of the understanding of this is how it did it. So this is what it looked at to try and give you that, so that you could look at that and say, actually, you missed this other thing. Can you also go look at it from a different angle? And then the next thing that I wanted to share is around how I integrated with Tina CMS. And for those of you that are not familiar with Tina CMS, why are you laughing, Brooke? It's not funny.
I'm just laughing at the laugh.
When I said the jokes earlier, you didn't laugh, and now when I'm not saying the jokes, then it's funny. Yeah. So Tina CMS is a visual editor. The content all gets stored in Git, and it's really easy to use. It's headless CMS, data's in Git. So that portfolio that I mentioned of my wife's, at the moment, every time she wants to add something, The RT guy does it. And the RT guy doesn't get paid to do those website updates, Keeping the site up is hard enough sometimes. So I decided, well, this is a great user experience. Let's see if I can just vibe it up. So I said, I'd like to completely convert this project to use Tina CMS. You have to be nice to the AI. So please do the whole thing for me, not just half, And then any JSON files that are in the data folder, those I want to be managed by Tina for me. So when it was done, it gave me this cool doc, said this is exactly what I did for the integration. It also told me in there, this is actually how Tina works, because maybe I don't know that. And in the end, I could go to the Tina, I can go /admin, and I could just manage my content, well, in this case, my wife's content. Now, her blog doesn't use the cool visual editing, but where I also used a similar prompt is saying, hey, I've got this recipe site, which, again, made with Spark, edited with some features with Copilot, and I wanted to edit that myself without going and finding a Visual Studio to do it on. And this is what that visual editing experience looks like. So now I can go and edit one of those items, and as I'm changing stuff sort of on the left-hand side, that's updating live for me in the preview as it would normally be. So when you save these changes, that pushes it back into Git, and then sort of gets deployed out like you'd expect to your normal site. At least I think that's how it works, right? Yep, that's exactly how it works. I am definitely the expert on that process, and I know it intensely because I wrote the code. So we're nearing the end. Let's look at a journey recap. We started with Gemini. Just a couple of conversations. It was okay. We moved to 2.5. It wrote a bunch of code for us. We had agents. Agents wrote a bunch more code for us. We got GitHub Spark. It wrote all the code that none of us really want to write. I mean, some of us want to write, but there's help groups for that, I think. And then we got MCPs, Copilot CLI, and Docker. And now that full loop just feels very natural. In a month's time, we'll probably have other stuff that feels even more cool than what this is. It reminds me of a demo I saw a long time ago. People were using, I think it was Google's AI Studio, where you screen share with it. And so while you're working, it's taking in the stream and actually being like a pair programmer with you. So you're like, oh, I don't know what this is. And it's like, oh, you should change this and you should run this thing. Super creepy, but super, super interesting. So yeah, who knows? Maybe one day we just won't even need to care about what the code looks like, and it'll just work. So yeah, every tool has its purpose, right? Sort of reiterated it a couple times. You have to understand what tool's good at what, where you can use which tool. And the only way you do that is by hitting your head against the wall multiple times. And in the moment, it might feel pointless, but when you get that good sort of iteration going, it feels awesome. So your action plan. The workflow tax feels too high, just skip it. Going and installing Cursor because everyone else says Cursor is amazing. If your workflow is working great, maybe it's not worth the investment. Maybe it is. You just have to decide if it's something that you want to do. Wait for the flow to feel more natural. If you force the flow, you're not going to enjoy the process, and then you won't be as excited to actually use the stuff. And then understand each tool's strengths. And those strengths will change. So use Gemini a lot. Maybe use ChatGPT a lot. Maybe use a local LLM a lot. You have to sort of keep re-evaluating to some extent on an ongoing basis to try and keep up with being good at using those tools. And then whatever you do, make sure security is front of mind. There's a lot of examples of people installing interesting things, and it just pwns their whole machine. All their environment secrets, everything's sitting up in a Singularity GitHub repo for the world to see. And there was a lot of those people. and orchestrate where it makes sense. Like sometimes you're going to go do stuff yourself, right? Jump into Gemini. I have this idea. Let's figure it out. Let's write some stuff. And sometimes it just makes sense to say, hey, agent, go do the thing for me. Try and measure some actual return on investment, right? There's a lot of hype, especially like this. I haven't even looked at social media today, but with Gemini's 3.0 models coming out, there was some leaks that I looked at yesterday, but there's just so much information with that now. And if you go and focus on, oh, this is amazing, everything's awesome, you're probably going to burn a lot of effort. Like you could probably let some of that information filter to you, and then that way use your time better. So I took a stab at, in my mind, redefining what a 10x developer is. It's a term that's sort of got a lot of negative connotations with it. And for me, a 10x dev isn't someone who just codes faster, right? That's generally the idea of it. It's someone who knows the capabilities of the different tools, orchestrates them, knows when to trust it, when not to trust it. And importantly, which is not on this, is sharing that with their teammates. Because if you do everything in isolation, you'd be sitting at that 10x dev and your teammate's sitting at a 1x, and that's a lot worse for you and your team than if you were sitting maybe at a 7 or an 8 and they were sitting at a 4. So today we covered some code-focused apps, some different development workflows, and that's sort of just the beginning of what these tools could do. As I said, I had to sort of have a cutoff at some point, right? What we didn't focus on is all the image generation stuff. Some of the weird photos I had earlier, that's all generated. A while back, that would be hard to do. And again, I would need someone who's a talented designer to do that stuff for me. Now I can do just lower than average photos myself, and it sort of works. We didn't cover how we can use this for content creation. So lots of the blog posts, we sort of did with the ADRs, but like lots of the blog posts, or just in general, figuring out a script. So I had a blog post, I was like, this sounds like a great video. Use Gemini to help turn that into a transcript for me. Figured out where the A roll and the B roll and where the voiceovers are. Sort of figure that all out, and then I go to our TV team and say, hey, this is what I'm looking at. Like, what's some of your input? Instead of sort of starting again from scratch. And business processes, and probably hundreds of other examples. As I mentioned earlier, had to cut off at some point, and that's sort of where it is. There's more things, actually, except the investigations. I was super excited for that, so I had to make more changes. But there's just so much stuff coming out. Like, find your trusted sources of information, and use that as a good baseline for what's worth putting some investment in or not. So some resources, there's my blogs, there's the Copilot Docker tool, Tina CMS, you can get that at tina.io. The project that I use for the URL shortener is out there. My wife's blog, if you want to go look at some of that code, or go look at the sort of the different commits and how that stuff went in, or my recipes site. Yeah, that's sort of summary. We've gone through everything. It was a very long time. Thanks everyone for staying. But I have a Mac, right? So there's just one more thing, because you just have to. Maybe obvious, maybe not obvious. The way I planned the talk, that was done with GitHub Copilot. So I have a little bit longer than that, but I think it's like 1,300 lines of this is generally what that structure looks like. It started off with, my idea is I want to go through my blog posts of when AI sort of wasn't as helpful, and sort of try and get that journey. And we worked the high level what that looks like, and then dove into the contents of the blog, pulled out specific examples, and then built the overall flow of what that looks like. And then naturally, when you have a flow for a talk, you need to work on slides for the talk. So I said, this is what our template looks like. Unzip the PowerPoint so it knows this is what the slides are. And mostly didn't follow exactly what it had, but this has a general structure of this is how you would take those concepts and turn it into different pieces. lots of it I changed, some of it I didn't change. But the idea here is Copilot CLI doesn't feel like the thing that you would use in this sort of context. Sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't work. Thank you. Questions also has the QR code. I knew that because I did these. So it's a long day, man.
What's next?
On this stuff. So some of the interesting stuff that, again, Dan, that he was working on recently is GitHub have a spec kit, and the idea there is that you, I suppose. The question for the recording was what's next? There we go. I did the thing. Aren't you supposed to be reminding me about that, Sam? Oh, yeah, okay, cool. Yeah, so one of the things that's interesting to play with is like GitHub has a spec kit. And the idea there is that that whole iterating process that I'm currently doing a lot with Gemini, it helps you with that process and helps you try and break down the pieces of work. And it generates from that a bunch of markdown files that's captures what the requirements are of what you're trying to do, and then it gets agents to do those pieces of work. So it'll be like, hey, this is the first chunk of work, let's work through this. Here's the next chunk, and because that's captured up front as part of this is what the plan is, it's very hard for the agents to sort of go off track with that because that plan's sort of defined. So that's something that's interesting for me to eventually go play with. And luckily Dan did a lot of that investigation, so I sort of have an idea of where that could be. Outside of that, I think it'll be interesting to see what we can do more with the Copilot CLI environments. There's a lot more tools and a lot more capabilities coming to those. I think the part that's just missing for me is the platforms to share this easily, because I feel like there's just so many avenues to share information at the moment. So trying to figure out how do we break that down so we can share maybe the same information to different levels. Here's that concept for a junior, for a mid-dev, for a senior, and try and make that experience feel seamless for people consuming that information as well as creating it. Awesome. Thanks. Any other questions? Yep.
You've done a massive deep dive on the tooling.
Yeah.
That kind of meta knowledge to get all this stuff working. You spent that time doing that. Do you see yourself spending less time learning more about the actual deep understanding of things in the technical space?
It depends, because I'm a consultant. So where I understand the technology already, so the question from Sam, who's supposed to remind me about the questions but didn't, is I spent a lot of time going through how I'm using all the tools, but do I find myself understanding sort of the underlying technologies and stuff that I'm working with less now, right? Okay. So when I'm working with something that I already understand, like .NET, right? I understand .NET a lot, I understand Azure a lot, I understand the infrastructure as code stuff there a lot. I feel more confident to hand that off easily to Copilot because I can verify the output that it gives a lot quicker. For anything UI, I feel very confident doing it as well because I don't care as much about the UI. Especially for the personal projects. For the real projects, I do this other AI where I go into teams and I say, hey, one of the devs, can you do the thing? And they do the same thing. They take a little bit longer than Copilot would do it, but the quality is normally wherever the quality should be for UI stuff. And then I'm also trying to learn Swift. So the easy way to do that would just say, hey, go write me the app. But back to the .NET thing, I understand .NET, I don't understand Swift. So I'm currently doing here's beginner videos for understanding Swift. So that I can understand the underlying tech a lot better. And then once I understand that better, then I'll use AI to sort of generate those things. Basically, anything I care a lot more about, I want to understand the underlying stuff before I let AI do that for me. Cool. Awesome. Thanks, everyone. And it was a long one. I did warn you guys. I didn't know it was going to be this long. You know? Yeah.
I saw your problem. You said 60 minutes in your board.
No, you missed that. So it gave me a 45-minute version, a 60-minute version, and a 2 to 3 hour workshop, which I did warn some people we might be moving towards when we went into this earlier. But yeah, awesome. Thanks, everyone.